The constant hum of machinery was the only sound Area Voss knew anymore. Her fingers, once delicate instruments of scientific precision, now moved mechanically along the endless rows of circuit boards. Each movement was calculated, each gesture controlled by the neural implant that pressed against her brain stem like an invasive parasite. 5 years had passed since her capture. 5 years since the research expedition to the outer rim of the Andromeda cluster went catastrophically wrong. The Kralzar Imperium had descended on their research station without warning, their massive crystalline ships cutting through the station's defenses like paper. Arya remembered those first moments. The screams, the sudden silence, the cold efficiency with which her colleagues were sorted, processed, and stripped of their humanity. She had been a xenobiologist once. Her work had focused on adaptive biological systems, studying how different species survived in the most extreme conditions. The irony was not lost on her. Now she was the one being studied, processed, and transformed into nothing more than a living component of the Kralzar's massive machine. The workstation stretched before her, an endless landscape of metallic surfaces and blinking interfaces. Around her, dozens of other prisoners worked in similar silence. Some were human, others were species she had once studied. The silicon-based life forms from the Nexus cluster, the photosynthetic beings from the gas giant colonies. Each had been reduced to the same state. Living machinery, their individual identities erased. The neural implant pulsed, a constant reminder of her lack of freedom. It monitored her thoughts, controlled her movements, prevented any hint of rebellion. The Kralzar had perfected this technology over millennia, breaking down sentient beings into efficient workers. They didn't just conquer, they transformed. Arya's eyes, once bright with scientific curiosity, now held a dull resignation. She had seen what happened to those who resisted. The punishment chambers were a nightmare of neural recalibration, a process that stripped away memories, personality, hope. Prisoners would return as empty shells, their previous selves completely erased. Her current task involved assembling complex communication arrays. She didn't know their purpose, and the implant prevented her from even wondering too deeply. Each circuit, each connection was made with perfect precision. Her scientific mind, once a source of pride, was now nothing more than a tool for alien efficiency. The massive processing center stretched for kilometers, a testament to the Kralzar's industrial might. Prisoners moved like carefully programmed robots, their movements synchronized, their spirits crushed. Massive energy fields surrounded the facility, making escape impossible. Surveillance was constant, with neural monitors detecting even the slightest deviant thought. Arya remembered her life before, the excitement of discovery, the joy of understanding new life forms, the freedom of scientific exploration. Now, her world was reduced to this single workstation, these endless rows of circuits, this constant mechanical rhythm. A supervisor passed, a towering Kralzar administrator with multiple sensory stalks and a complex exoskeleton that shifted colors based on mood and efficiency readings. Its eyes swept over the workers, checking compliance, measuring output. Arya kept her movements steady, her thoughts blank. Any deviation would be immediately detected and punished. She had long since given up hope of rescue. The Terran Expeditionary Force rarely ventured this deep into Kralzar territory. Her colleagues, her family, her entire previous life was nothing more than a distant memory, fading like an old photograph exposed to harsh light. As another work cycle began, Arya Voss continued her task, just another piece of machinery in the vast, unforgiving system of the Kralzar Imperium, unbroken, but far from free. Little did she know that everything was about to change. The massive transport ship shuddered as it entered the Kralzar processing facility. Another batch of prisoners, another day of conquest. But something was different about this group. Among them stood Marcus Reyes, a combat engineer who looked nothing like the typical defeated captive. His eyes moved constantly, taking in every detail of the processing chamber. Where other prisoners slouched in fear, Reyes stood straight. His posture spoke of discipline, of something the Kralzar had not yet broken. The neural restraints that hung loosely around his wrists seemed almost like an afterthought, not the complete control mechanism they were designed to be. The Kralzar processing administrator, a towering creature with translucent skin and multiple sensory appendages, moved down the line of prisoners. Its scanning devices moved back and forth, categorizing each captive for their specific utility. Most prisoners trembled under its gaze. Not Reyes. Human. Designation: Marcus Reyes. Origin: Terran Expeditionary Force, Special Adaptation Unit. The administrator's mechanical voice announced. Its sensory stalks extended, probing deeper, trying to break through Reyes's mental defenses. But Reyes's mind was unlike anything the Kralzar had encountered before. Years of specialized training in psychological resistance and technological adaptation had prepared him for this moment. Where most humans would collapse under the neural probing, he presented a mind like a complex, shifting maze. The processing facility was a marvel of alien engineering. Massive energy fields crackled between processing stations. Prisoners from dozens of different species moved like automated machines, their individual wills crushed by advanced neural conditioning. Reyes observed it all with a calm that bordered on contempt. Near him, other prisoners were already being stripped of their identities. A silicon-based life form from the Nexus cluster had its memory circuits being systematically erased. A photosynthetic being from the gas giant colonies was being fitted with neural restraints that would turn it into nothing more than a living machine. Aria Voss watched from her workstation, her eyes briefly meeting Reyes's for a moment. Something in his gaze was different. It wasn't hope, exactly. It was something harder. Calculation. Determination. The Kralzar believed in their technological supremacy. Their neural conditioning had broken countless species. Entire civilizations had fallen to their ability to transform sentient beings into nothing more than efficient workers. They saw humans as just another species to be processed, to be broken. They were wrong. Reyes was moved to a processing station designed to completely suppress individual thought. Massive neural interface devices descended, their crystalline tendrils designed to penetrate and reshape consciousness. The Kralzar technicians worked with cold efficiency, confident in their technology. But as the neural interfaces connected, something unexpected happened. Reyes's mind did not break. Instead, it seemed to absorb the neural probing, analyzing it. His background in combat engineering wasn't just about building machines. It was about understanding systems, about finding weaknesses. The Kralzar technicians exchanged confused signals. Their monitoring devices showed strange feedback loops. Reyes wasn't resisting in the way they expected. He wasn't fighting. He was studying. One of the senior administrators approached, its color-shifting exoskeleton turning a deep shade of concern. Something was happening that their centuries of technological domination had not prepared them for. Marcus Reyes allowed a slight smile to cross his face. Just for a moment. The processing continued. Prisoners were assigned to workstations. Neural implants were activated. Control was established. Or so the Kralzar believed. Little did they know that the arrival of Marcus Reyes was about to change everything. The workstation was a maze of precision and control. Hundreds of prisoners moved like perfectly programmed machines, their movements synchronized, their spirits crushed. But Marcus Reyes was different. To the Kralzar monitoring systems, he appeared to be just another worker. In reality, he was weaving a complex network of communication right under the alien sensory arrays. His first target was communication, not through words, but through a system so subtle that even the most advanced neural monitors would fail to detect it. Years of specialized training in the Terran Expeditionary Force's most secretive unit had prepared him for exactly this kind of impossible situation. Micro-movements became his language. A slight twitch of a finger. A barely perceptible shift in posture. The angle of a hand. Each gesture carried meaning, invisible to the alien supervisors, but clear to those who knew how to look. Arya Voss noticed first. Her scientific background had always made her observant. Where others saw just another prisoner, she saw patterns. Strange, deliberate patterns in Rice's movements that didn't match the forced efficiency of the other workers. At first, she thought it was a mistake, a glitch in the neural conditioning. But then she saw it again. A sequence of movements that was too precise to be random, too complex to be accidental. Near Rice, a silicon-based life form from the Nexus cluster worked on a different assembly line. Its crystalline structure seemed rigid, almost machine-like, but something changed when Rice moved his hand in a specific pattern. The slightest hesitation, a microscopic deviation from the perfect work rhythm. Communication was beginning. The Kralzar facility was a marvel of technological oppression. Massive energy fields surrounded the work areas. Neural monitors tracked every thought, every potential rebellion. Prisoners from dozens of species had been reduced to living machinery, their individual identities erased. But humans were different. Rice understood something fundamental about the Kralzar system. Their technology was based on absolute control, on the belief that sentience could be completely suppressed. They saw prisoners as components, not as thinking beings capable of adaptation. He began to map the facility, not through obvious observation, but through tiny, calculated interactions. A specific hand movement to a silicon-based prisoner, a momentary eye contact with a photosynthetic being. Each interaction was a thread, slowly weaving a network of potential resistance. Arya watched, her scientific mind working overtime. She recognized the pattern now. This wasn't random. This was deliberate, systematic, something she had never seen in 5 years of captivity. The Kralzar supervisors continued their constant monitoring. Their sensory stalks moved back and forth, checking efficiency, measuring output. To them, everything appeared normal. Prisoners worked, systems functioned, control was complete. They were wrong. By the end of the work cycle, a subtle change had begun. Prisoners who had been completely broken were showing microscopic signs of awareness. A moment of hesitation, a split-second deviation from perfect efficiency. Rice had started something. The neural implants that had controlled these prisoners for years were about to face their first real challenge. A challenge they were not designed to recognize, a form of rebellion that existed beyond their comprehension. Arya felt something she had not felt in 5 years, a tiny spark of something dangerous. Hope. The Kralzar believed in their technological supremacy. Their neural conditioning systems were the most advanced in the known galaxy, capable of breaking down the will of entire species in a matter of hours. But they had never encountered anyone like Marcus Rice. In the small moments between work cycles, Rice began to study the facility systems. His background as a combat engineer was more than just military training. It was a deep understanding of how technologies connect, how systems breathe and communicate. Arya watched him carefully. Her scientific mind recognized something extraordinary happening. Where most prisoners saw only their immediate workstation, Rice saw a complex network of technological possibilities. During one maintenance cycle, he deliberately positioned himself near a critical junction box. To the Kralzar supervisors, it looked like a simple positioning error, but for Rice, it was a calculated move. His fingers, seemingly idle, were mapping the electromagnetic frequencies of the neural control systems. The Kralzar neural implants worked on a specific quantum frequency. They believed this frequency was unbreakable, a perfect method of control that could suppress individual thought completely. They were wrong. Rice understood that every technological system has a weakness. Every frequency can be disrupted. Every control mechanism has a point of failure. Arya noticed his pattern. Short, precise movements, fingers that seemed to trace invisible lines in the air. Her background in xenobiology gave her a unique perspective. She recognized that Rice was doing more than just observing. He was analyzing. Their first real communication happened without words. A series of carefully timed glances, a microscopic nod, a slight movement of a hand that meant more than any spoken language. The Kralzar facility was a maze of technological control. Massive energy fields surrounded the work areas. Neural monitors tracked every potential thought of rebellion. Prisoners from dozens of species had been reduced to living machines, their individual identities completely erased. But Reyes saw something different. Where others saw a perfect system of control, he saw a complex network with multiple entry points. Every technology has a rhythm. Every control system has a heartbeat. He began to collect small components, a minor circuit here, a discarded neural interface there. To the Kralzar supervisors, these were meaningless pieces of waste. To Reyes, they were building blocks of a potential solution. Aria's scientific mind started to connect the dots. She recognized the pattern of his collection. These weren't random pieces. They were specific components that could potentially create an interference device. The quantum frequency that controlled the neural implants was precise. Too precise, and in that precision lay its greatest weakness. Reyes understood something fundamental about technological control. No system is absolute. No control is perfect. There are always gaps, always weaknesses. By the end of the work cycle, he had collected enough components to begin building something. Not a weapon, not a traditional tool of rebellion. Something more subtle. A device that could potentially disrupt the most advanced neural control system in the galaxy. The Kralzar continued their monitoring. Their sensory stalks moved back and forth, checking efficiency, measuring output. To them, everything appeared normal. Prisoners worked. Systems functioned. Control was complete. They were wrong. Aria felt a sensation she had not experienced in 5 years. Something dangerous was brewing. Something the Kralzar had never anticipated. Hope was becoming a weapon. The first sign of change was almost invisible. A prisoner from the Nexus cluster. A silicon-based life form that had been completely controlled for years. Hesitated for a fraction of a second during a work cycle. To the Kralzar supervisors, it was nothing. A minor glitch in the system. But to Marcus Reyes and Aria Voss, it was everything. Weeks of careful preparation had led to this moment. The device Reyes had constructed was not a traditional weapon. It was something far more dangerous to the Kralzar, a neural resonance disruptor. Constructed from discarded components and built with precise scientific understanding, it was designed to interfere with the quantum frequency that controlled the neural implants. Aria's scientific mind had been critical in its development. Her understanding of neural systems, combined with Reyes's engineering expertise, created something the Kralzar had never anticipated, a way to break their most advanced control technology. The first test was subtle. During a routine maintenance cycle, Reyes activated the device. Nothing seemed to happen. The workstation continued to function. Prisoners moved with their usual mechanical precision. But something had changed. The silicon-based prisoner was the first to show signs. Its crystalline structure, usually perfectly aligned, now showed microscopic variations. A slight tremor in its movement. A moment of hesitation that should not have been possible. More prisoners began to show similar signs. A photosynthetic being from the gas giant colonies momentarily looked up from its workstation. A humanoid prisoner's hand moved in a way that was not part of the programmed work sequence. The Kralzar monitoring systems began to register anomalies. At first, they were minor. Small deviations that could be explained as mechanical errors. But they were growing. Reyes and Aria communicated through their now perfected system of micro-movements and carefully timed glances. Each small change was a victory. Each moment of individual thought was a crack in the Kralzar's seemingly perfect control system. The facility's neural monitoring systems were the most advanced in the known galaxy. Developed over millennia, they had broken countless species. The Kralzar believed their technology was absolute. They were wrong. Slowly, prisoners began to remember fragments of their past. A memory here, an emotion there. Things that should have been completely erased by the neural implants were beginning to resurface. The Kralzar supervisors became aware something was wrong. Their sensory stalks moved more frantically. Monitoring systems showed increasing irregularities, but they could not identify the source of the disruption. Area watched as prisoners began to show signs of individual thought. A prisoner who had been completely controlled for years suddenly remembered a home world. Another recalled a family member's face. These were moments that should have been impossible. Reyes continued to fine-tune the device. Each adjustment was precise. Each modification was calculated. He understood that they were fighting a war of information, a frequency of the smallest possible margins. The workstation that had been a place of perfect control was becoming something else, a place of potential rebellion, a place where individual will was beginning to resurface. The Kralzar had believed their technology was unbreakable. They had conquered entire civilizations, turned sentient beings into nothing more than living machines. They thought they understood control. They were about to learn how wrong they were. As another work cycle began, something fundamental had changed. The prisoners were no longer just machines. They were beginning to remember what it meant to be alive, to be individuals, to be free. The rebellion had begun, not with a weapon, not with violence, but with the most dangerous thing possible: hope. The uprising began not with violence, but with calculated precision. Marcus Reyes understood that brute force would fail against the Kralzar's advanced systems. This rebellion would be a surgical strike against the very foundations of their control. Prisoners from different species started to move in unexpected patterns. A silicon-based life form from the Nexus cluster positioned itself near a critical power junction. A photosynthetic being from the gas giant colony subtly adjusted a communication relay. Each movement was part of a larger plan, invisible to the Kralzar monitoring systems. Area Voss watched the transformation with scientific precision. Where once prisoners moved like perfectly programmed machines, now they showed glimpses of individual purpose. Her understanding of biological systems, combined with Reyes's tactical training, created a strategy unlike any the Kralzar had encountered before. The facility's control systems were a marvel of technological oppression. Massive energy fields, neural monitors that tracked every potential thought, supervisors with multiple sensory stalks that could detect the slightest deviation. But they had never faced an enemy that understood their technology from within. Reyes had mapped the facility's critical infrastructure during weeks of careful observation. Power junctions, communication relays, neural control centers. Each system was a potential point of vulnerability. The rebellion would not be a direct attack, but a systematic dismantling of the Kralzar's technological supremacy. The first major disruption happened during a routine maintenance cycle. Prisoners who had been completely controlled for years suddenly moved with purpose. A human worker disconnected a critical power routing module. A crystalline being from the outer colonies adjusted a neural monitoring interface. To the Kralzar supervisors, these seemed like minor maintenance activities. They were wrong. Each action was carefully coordinated. Prisoners who had been broken for years were now working together with a precision that defied their previous conditioning. They were not fighting. They were strategically dismantling the system that had controlled them. Area noticed how each species contributed differently. The silicon-based life forms used their unique electromagnetic properties to interfere with monitoring systems. The photosynthetic beings manipulated energy routing in ways the Kralzar had never anticipated. Humans brought a level of adaptive thinking that was completely unexpected. The neural implants that had controlled these prisoners began to fail in ways the Kralzar could not understand. It was not a complete breakdown. It was a systematic, calculated destruction of their control mechanisms. Reyes moved through the facility like a ghost. To the monitoring systems, he appeared to be just another worker. But he was the conductor of this complex symphony of rebellion. Each prisoner was an instrument, playing a part in a larger strategy. The Kralzar began to realize something was wrong. Their monitoring systems showed increasing anomalies. Prisoners were no longer functioning with perfect synchronization. Individual thoughts were breaking through their neural conditioning. But by the time they understood what was happening, it was too late. The facility that had been a perfect machine of control was becoming something else. a place where individual will was reasserting itself, a place where prisoners were transforming from components back into sentient beings. Arya felt something she had not experienced in 5 years. The pure excitement of scientific discovery. The joy of understanding a system so completely that you could remake it from within. The uprising was not a battle. It was a precise, calculated deconstruction of the most advanced control system in the known galaxy. The Krulzar had believed they understood control. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The Krulzar Central Control Hub was a marvel of technological engineering. Massive crystalline structures pulsed with energy, monitoring billions of prisoners across multiple star systems, sensory networks that could detect the slightest deviation in thought patterns, communication systems that could suppress rebellion before it even began. But today, something was wrong. Marcus Reyes and Arya Voss had engineered a collapse that went beyond physical destruction. They were attacking the very foundation of the Krulzar's technological supremacy. Each system that failed was not just a mechanical breakdown, but a fundamental challenge to the aliens' understanding of control. The first signs of total system failure began in small, almost unnoticeable ways. Communication relays started to show strange interference patterns. Neural monitoring networks began to create feedback loops that made no sense to the Krulzar technicians. Prisoners who had been completely controlled for years were now moving with purpose. A silicon-based lifeform redirected a critical power junction. A photosynthetic being from the gas giant colonies interfered with communication protocols. Humans brought a level of adaptive thinking that the Krulzar had never anticipated. Arya watched the systemic collapse with scientific precision. Her understanding of biological systems combined with Reyes's tactical training created a strategy of destruction unlike any the Krulzar had encountered before. They were not just fighting. They were completely rewriting the rules of technological control. The Central Control Hub began to register massive anomalies. Monitoring systems that had been perfect for millennia now showed impossible data streams. Prisoners were no longer functioning as components. They were becoming individuals again. Reyes had mapped every critical infrastructure point during weeks of careful observation. Power distribution centers, communication relays, neural control networks. Each system was a potential point of vulnerability. The rebellion was a surgical strike against the very heart of Krulzar technological domination. Krulzar supervisors began to panic. Their sensory stalks moved frantically, trying to understand the breakdown happening around them. But they were facing an enemy that understood their technology better than they did. The facility that had been a perfect machine of control was transforming. Prisoners from different species worked together with a precision that defied their previous conditioning. They were not fighting with weapons. They were systematically dismantling the most advanced control system in the known galaxy. Communication networks began to fail. Neural monitoring systems created impossible feedback loops. Power distribution became erratic. The Krulzar had believed their technology was unbreakable. They were wrong. Arya felt the excitement of scientific discovery. Each failing system was a puzzle being solved. Each breakdown was a moment of understanding how technological control could be defeated. Reyes moved through the facility like a strategic conductor. To the failing monitoring systems, he appeared to be just another worker, but he was orchestrating a complete systematic collapse. The Central Control Hub began to fragment. Massive crystalline structures that had monitored billions of prisoners now showed signs of complete failure. Communication networks collapsed. Neural monitoring systems began to shut down. Prisoners who had been broken for years were now reclaiming their individual identities. The silicon-based lifeforms used their unique electromagnetic properties to interfere with final control mechanisms. Humans brought an adaptive thinking that completely overwhelmed the Krulzar's technology. In the final moments of the systemic collapse, something extraordinary happened. The prisoners were not just breaking free. They were transforming the very understanding of technological control. The Krulzar had believed they understood oppression. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The Central Control Hub was their final target. Where once prisoners had been nothing more than living machinery, now they moved with a purpose that terrified the Kralzar. Marcus Reyes and Arya Voss stood at the center of a rebellion that was about to change everything. Prisoners from dozens of species worked together with a precision that defied their previous conditioning. The silicon-based lifeforms from the Nexus cluster used their unique electromagnetic properties to disable critical systems. Photosynthetic beings from the gas giant colonies manipulated energy networks. Humans brought an adaptive strategy that the Kralzar had never anticipated. Reyes had mapped every weakness in the Kralzar's technological infrastructure. Years of combat engineering training had prepared him for this moment. But this was more than a military operation. This was a complete reimagining of technological control. Arya's scientific mind saw the bigger picture. This wasn't just about breaking free. This was about proving that no system of control is absolute. That individual will could overcome the most advanced technological oppression. The final assault began quietly. No weapons, no traditional violence, just a systematic dismantling of the most advanced control system in the known galaxy. Kralzar supervisors watched in horror as their perfect system began to fall apart. Massive crystalline structures that had monitored billions of prisoners now showed critical failures. Communication networks collapsed. Neural monitoring systems shut down one by one. Rays moved through the central hub like a strategic conductor. Each movement was calculated. Each action designed to exploit the smallest vulnerability in the Kralzar's technological supremacy. He was not just fighting. He was rewriting the rules of resistance. Arya worked beside him, her understanding of biological systems complementing his tactical approach. Where Reyes saw technological vulnerabilities, she saw the deeper implications. This was a liberation of minds, not just bodies. The prisoners who had been completely controlled for years were now taking back their individual identities. A human worker disconnected a critical power module. A crystalline being adjusted a neural interface in a way that caused cascading system failures. The Kralzar had believed their technology was unbreakable. They were wrong. In the final moments of the confrontation, something extraordinary happened. The prisoners were not just breaking free. They were transforming the very understanding of technological control. Reyes and Arya reached the central control core. This was the heart of the Kralzar's system. The place where billions of prisoners had been reduced to nothing more than living components. Now it would become the symbol of their liberation. With a series of precise actions, they began the final dismantling. Not with destruction, but with a complete reprogramming. Every system that had been used to control was now being turned against itself. The Kralzar supervisors tried to stop them, but their technology, which had seemed so perfect, now worked against them. The very systems of control they had developed were now their greatest weakness. Prisoners from different species worked together with a coordination that was impossible just hours before. They were not just fighting for themselves, they were fighting for a new understanding of freedom. In the final moments, the central control hub became something else. Not a place of oppression, but a testament to the power of individual will, of collective resistance. Reyes looked at Arya. No words were needed. They had done something impossible. The Kralzar Imperium's technological supremacy crumbled, not with a violent explosion, but with a systematic, calculated dismantling that showed the true power of adaptation, intelligence, and collective purpose. Freedom was no longer something given. It was something taken. And the galaxy would never be the same again.